So thanks again, everyone, for being here. This is our second session, which is on the Children's Sensorium project, and we're going to begin with a welcome from Nawi Carolyn Briggs, Professor Nawi Carolyn Briggs, AM, PhD. She's got so many superpowers.
Where are all these people from?
I don't know everyone here. There's some people from Gainesville.
There's not a lot of them, so we can sort of get us...
We're also
I'd like to know who I'm talking to.
We're also streaming online, so there might be people as far away as Denmark and Europe, if they've other places in Europe and the UK if they've gotten up on time.
Yeah, we had a whole heap. I've just come back from WIPSI, so the World Indigenous Education Conference, peoples from all over. There was a few people from Denmark. They invited us over there. And then we had the Sami, so lots of people. So it was really overwhelming to meet so many people. I think everyone was escaping to come to Australia. And we had a wonderful time. And it was the power of all First Nations peoples gathering and sharing ideas and concepts. So, firstly, in the language afforded me, it's Wamajika. Marambig Big Bunurong, Nemde Baruptan Ata Willam. Come with a purpose to our beautiful home, the lands of the two great bays. I am from the Yallikat Willam of the Bunwurrung language group. I'm in now at the moment, native title, put claim on my country. So it's a big journey. And it is my great pleasure to be able to welcome you all here today on behalf of RMIT. But it is also my responsibility to ensure that you do come with a purpose. Woman, ask, yeah, what is your intention? So this is your intention, is to learn about what we are presenting to you today. I do so not only on behalf of my ancestors, the Yallikat Willam of the Bunwurrung. I do so on behalf of all First Nations peoples on which lands we meet today. First Nations peoples across Australia all share a special connections to our lands and waters of their ancestors that have not been disconnected since millennia, despite the dispossession, the displacement, the discrimination that we've all experienced over the last 230 years. These connections date back to our creation stories. For the Bunwurrung, our creation stories tells us of Bunjuk, our creator spirit who travels as an eagle and who created the lands and waters around where we meet today. He also created the Kulin people and taught them about the circular relationships that they have with these lands and waters in order for us to be taken care of by the land. And we also this was about a reciprocal process. We had to take care of the land and waters. And this we did by adhering to the Wurrungi Big, the laws of the land, our customary laws, much like our laws today. These laws dictated how we interact with each other, how we conduct ourselves whilst we're on other people's country. And it is all about how we maintain those structures. The Bunwurrung Wurrungi Big speaks of three Pacific laws. The first law is Yalanj. It is a responsibility that we have knowledge. And once knowledge has been attained, we then have the responsibility to ensure its survival, its continuation. We have the responsibility to our younger generation to maintain that knowledge and pass it down so it can be used for our future generations. We have the law of Jambana. This law speaks of community. The importance of community, the importance of our diverse communities, but how we unify that community. The Bunurong and the Kulin Nation understood the power of diversity that is within our lands that increases our capabilities. It was always good to share stories and our different experiences. However, they understood how to utilise this very powerful tool. They had to identify a common purpose. And what are these things that we all have in common? Something to think about. Finally, the last law is connection to country, or Pavanata, Mother Earth, or we might call it honouring sacred ground, paying respects to our past generations, the people who took care of the land before us, the people who lived and died on the land before we were here, paying respects to stories and histories on a land that we live today. We're very fortunate in this continent we now know as Australia to have 80,000 year plus of human history. And it is important to pay respects to that history, not only while we're here or at work, or when we go home. And if we can adhere to those three Warongi Bigs, I can say once again in my language of my ancestors, Omanjika, Maran Big Big Bunurong, Nunda Barok, Akta Willam, come with a purpose to our beautiful home. Nungujin, I am in your presence and you are in mine.
Thank you, Professor Ngawi Carolyn Briggs, AM PhD, for this wonderful welcome. It's in my head now. I'm now going to hand over to distinguished Professor Larissa Hjorth, who is at RMIT University and has published extensively on mobiles and play, sometimes in connection with one another, sometimes separately. So is a play scholar who's going to be chairing this conversation about the children's sensorium and its connection to Boonwurrung language and First Peoples knowledge. And at first, you might not think that the post-apocalyptic experience of First Nations people has anything to do with play, but we're here to look at how the playful way of being in the world relates to Indigenous ways of being in place.
Great. This is working? Yes, great. I should actually introduce you, Troy, although probably everybody knows Troy.
No, actually, I forgot to introduce myself even this morning, so keen to get to Matthias' presentation. But yeah, my name is Dr. Troy Innocent. I'm Director of the Future Play Lab at RMIT University and convener of this event. So welcome once again. Thanks, Larissa, for reminding me.
Glad we know who you are now. Okay, and Linda, Associate Professor Linda Knight, who is a professor in the School of Education and is also the Director of the Mapping Future Imaginaries Network. So, and we'll be talking about the Children's Sensorium today, which is an exhibition at the Design Hub. So the Design Hub is that building on the corner of Victoria Street, which somebody took pot shots at, or supposedly the circles were just dropping off randomly at one point. So, I don't know, someone had a thing about Sean Godsall, the designer, I don't know. Anyway, so if you go down into the very, very depths of the Design Hub, there's an exhibition curated by Grace McQuilton, and Grace worked very, very closely with Ngawi Caroline Briggs to really inform the design of the exhibition. And you can hear Ngawi Caroline Briggs beautiful stories as you walk into the space, talking about the 5 Williams, and it's just such a beautiful exhibition with the sounds and the smells and the touch. And so even though it's aimed at children, I think we all have the child inside, so just go there. And it's funny because like the walls are slowly, they haven't been slowly, they've been quickly filled up with all the voices of children's experience, and it's really great to see. We were in there the other day, and this little 2-year-old who had been, during the pandemic, just trapped at home. And this is one of the things that Grace was very much thinking about when she was designing this exhibition, was about the pandemic and how all the mental health services had been completely smashed. People were waiting a year to see a psychologist for children. And so this exhibition was trying to use creative practice, particularly informed by what it means to play on Indigenous lands, to think about different ways in which we can creatively intervene this really, really big issue that we're experiencing at the moment. So it's part of the Big Anxiety Festival, which is at the same time as Melbourne International Games Week. So lots and lots of things to see. And the Big Anxiety Festival explores creative practice interventions to mental health problems. And so there's lots of different exciting works from poetry, etc. So really have a look around. The city has really opened up to explore many things this week. And we've also got spring, which is pretty exciting because Melbourne never really does a good spring. So it feels kind of I feel optimistic at the moment, a little bit anyway, but it's probably just because we've got nice weather for a day. Is it Fashion Week? Oh my gosh, it's just like imploding. Like Melbourne won't know what to do with themselves. So one of the things that we're going to be talking about today is particularly thinking about what it means to play, and particularly children's play for well-being, and particularly thinking about it on Indigenous land. So what does it mean to think through some of those kind of key concepts? So, I mean, you were talking about, for example, Wamajeka, which is to come with purpose. So what does it mean when you come into a space and you think and you come with purpose and you lay bare that, and you hold that space and you hold that responsibility as well? And so we collaborated on a few different workshops with school groups, which was lots of fun, which I think, yes, we're seeing lots of pictures here, and these are the postcard prompts. So designed from, these are some wonderful Indigenous word cards that you can get from RMIT. I got them from the RMIT shop, which was designed in consultation with you, pretty much. And so these are some really kind of key words, and one of the things we wanted to do is how can we start to embed that kind of bilingual conversation with young people as they're doing. So it's a kinesthetic learning as well as just the kind of thinking about the words. And we had these yellow circles, which were thinking about the particular Kulin season with the wattle. And so kids responded to that, and they did their own kind of expressions and what they felt like, and then they went to the walls, and there was this little 2-year-old who had been kind of pretty much like trapped in her home for 2 years, and she was in the gallery, and her parents were like, yeah, go draw on the wall. You could see the parents going, oh my gosh, what are we doing? You know, she's going to go home and not understand boundaries. And she was like, she got 2 pens and she started drawing with both hands, and she was just totally in the zone. And then she'd stop and she'd look at me and she'd look at her mum, and we'd be like, yeah, and then she'd start going again. And it was just gorgeous to see. She was just so in the moment, and she was experiencing all the smells and all the voices and the sounds, and was really present. And that's something that one of the things that we've kind of learned through the pandemic is the importance of really, just being present rather than kind of distracted in. So I'm going to hand over perhaps to Troy, maybe first. to talk about the experience of the workshop. And I know that you used the word, Linda used the word Durham for her particular workshop. And Troy, you used Wiam Camp, did you?
Yeah. So I was working with 3 words. I was really ambitious. I thought, this is a great opportunity. I haven't worked with children since my children were young enough to engage in this type of play. Now it's a different type of play. And so I made games around Nagi, the dance ceremony, Wheelam, the idea of a home or place, and also Yabba, communication. And of course I was really ambitious with my prompts to the kids who said, today is a day where you can build your own world. And of course, this is a thing that children do every day.
In 20 minutes.
That's right. And so one of the things that we did was there was a beautiful space at the end of the exhibition which was full of sand, and I asked them by drawing and using light and sound and other things to make their own dance or their own celebration and say, how would you dance or how would you play together? And that was the second workshop, because the first one was complete chaos. Because I was saying they just went off and did their own thing, which was wonderful to observe, and they just wanted to grab all the toys and play with them. And so I just was watching. I felt like I didn't really need to be here. But the second one, I thought, let's work in one space with one familiar idea, which is this idea of making a celebration. And so they came up with their own idea of celebrating in that space and sharing and the technology, because the first one was just everyone for themselves in a lot of ways.
Can I just say, when Troy walked out and he had gadgets hanging all over him, he was like Mr. Gadget Man. And I thought, and Linda had her suit and everything, and I thought, this is not really fair. Nobody told me to bring gadgets and stuff. I didn't realise that this was So yeah, they were all looking at Troy because it was like they wanted the Gadget Man.
Yeah, it was good fun. But then, of course, the chaos of trying to keep track of all that gear. Light worked really well because there were a lot of spaces, and there was the second workshop talking with Linda about we were observing this game the kids just made with light, because the lights turned on and off, and they would hide them, and then they would light up, and they'd have to find them again, and drumming and so forth. But I'm really, really interested in language and that idea of other ways of being, and I think the example that you gave, Nawi, of womanjika is really fantastic, because it's a word that we're all familiar with, and in fact we asked the kids at the beginning about this word when we got them all together. What have I done? Got the control upside down.
You're trying to kick us off stage, are you? On to the next
because this idea that when we say welcome, which is the really literal translation, we think, it's welcoming, welcome. It's just like saying hello, but maybe it's the thing you say it's the thing I said to you when you arrived here, welcoming you into a space. But it's a really kind of anthropocentric, or English version is really anthropocentric in that it's about you welcoming someone, whereas this idea of womanjika being an acknowledgement of that other person and also why they're here is much more, it was, I guess, what Matthias was saying this morning about it being a we. And so already that one word, it creates a whole other way of being. And I think that's what we're really interested in this children's kind of workshop, and what Grace was interested in creating the Sensorium is transforming that space to allow for other ways of being in the world.
Great. Linda, did you want to talk about your...
Yeah, sure. Just really extending on what people have been talking about. I have a practice of mapping. It's a drawing practice, and it's a very experimental form of mapping. And I have used this for a little while now as both a form of research methodology as an art practice, and also to work pedagogically with others, and particularly with other children. And so I thought this would be a really nice way for us to work in the Sensorium, and thinking about the idea of the more than us, the more than human. Children, there's an idea that children struggle with kind of those bigger ideas and are quite, the popular idea is that children are egocentric, but actually my experience, quite the opposite is the case, that young children are often really, really kind of in tune with their surroundings and interested in the world and interested in things other than themselves. And this would be a wonderful thing to kind of think about. Thinking about Jugal and the heart, we all laid down, and I know there are some images of that showing. The children were very excited when they came in, which is absolutely understandable, particularly for children who've lived through the Melbourne lockdowns, which was, the longest one in the world. And this space was so provocative and so interesting. It was a great commitment on their part to calm themselves down, and we laid on the floor and we thought about becoming part of the earth. And we slowed our heartbeat down, and we kind of melded into the surface of the earth and imagined ourselves as rock or water or sand. And then once we were a part of the earth, we looked up and looked at the kind of life around us and the life going on above us. And then I encouraged the children to map what they could see. And this form of mapping is about a real kind of intensive attuning. So not just about seeing, but also hearing and feeling. And so, when there's a small breeze that floats across your face, how do you mark that? If you can hear something very loudly or very quietly, how do you mark that? How do you map these things? And then the kind of living life on the surface of the planet. What I found is that the children really kind of started to think about being part of a much bigger place, and to think about the space they were in. And then from the photos, you can see I wear a suit. It's just one of those paint suits or hazmat suit.
Very popular during the pandemic.
Yeah, that's right. And so there's all these associations of this, but then I became part of they disengaged themselves and became human again, and then I became part of the earth, and they got to map over me as a surface of the earth, which was also going back to what Larissa was saying in terms of permissions and expectations to draw on a person. They found really, really interesting and fun. And they kept saying to me, "What does it feel like? What does it feel like?" They really wanted to know what it felt. And I was like, I feel like I have lots of little mice running all over me. It's all these little pen tips. It was quite funny. Anyway, it was great fun.
Seeing them draw on your suit and seeing some of the great trepidation that some people had, and then other people were like, "Oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever!" And you could see it's kind of funny because it's like the walls as well, that kind of taboo. And then what happens when you open that door and kind of say, "Well, that taboo is socially constructed. How about we explore this?" And the creativity really comes to the forefront. So, I mean, this really brings up, what we mean by definitions of play. And I mean, I always think about it as a series of different definitions, from a methodology, a form of sociality, a critical inquiry, also an invitation to take risks and to be creative. But I suppose I would like to actually ask Carolyn Briggs to talk about this, because she's been working with some young, you can take mine if you want, some schools out in the Mornington Peninsula area. I'll let you talk about Belnowring, and so maybe you want to talk.
It's interesting because you grow up in that life. We had 80,000 year plus practice because we didn't have books. We had everything around us was telling us a story. How we learned the stars, how to see the in-between, how do you just explore. And I think that was an opportunity to bring this back into a setting, and the director there liked the concept. So we were able to, they're on a beautiful beach at Balnarring in Western Port. They're in between Western Port and Narram, so Merrin and Nam, and bush. So these little people, for the last 10 years of generations, have been going through this, exploring the land that they're on and connecting to place. So it's about people and place. And it was an issue when it was the lockdown, because I could only send my voice through a tape. Or the children used to lay down as a natural process. And the teacher said, why do you always lay down when Auntie is telling you a story? They said, because Auntie said, we've got a dream. So they dream. And I tell them the stories, they illustrate my stories, they sell their books to raise money. They're good quality books. Has anybody seen them?
I should have brought them down the design of
The next one is The Time of Chaos. So this is when the disruption to our waterways occurred and our land, our river country, became part of a bay, which is known as Port Phillip Bay. So everything was about exploring and bringing what you grew up in to making it normal. Remembering play, remembering discovery, remembering to find the ways. And like I said to Troy, when I was having my trauma about one of my grandsons who had a massive accident, I needed to run and I needed to move around the city, my city. And I kept coming up against laneways and jutting and moving, trying to navigate around country to call on the energies that I needed to call on. And they're the sorts of things of freedom, but the cityscape is blocking every move, every direction. I tried to find my way around. So I suddenly realised this city tells another story, a very colonial construct of a story. My story, like I'm working with my students in architecture, I try to get them to rethink what the country looked like. I said, there is nothing on this land would identify us as the first people on this country. It's very structured. It's like any other city. I love my Melbourne, but it's very... You can go to any city in the world and you'll see a city. And the reconstruction of a river. That river wasn't a river. It was a chain of ponds. And when somebody said, oh, it's called the Yarra, that was a waterfall. It falls. It's a description of what the water does. So we ended up with a river called Yarra. So we've reclaimed it as the Burrung, the River of Mist. Because when the snows melt and the mountains, the water runs off and fills up through the river. And then they disconnected that down at Queen's Bridge. The bay comes in. So it's rechanged everything of the living entities that you're a part of. And this is what we try to do with children. That they're a very important part of the construction. They're the new architects to the change, what will occur. So we've got to get them grounded back into place. Get them to smell it, listen to the birds, name the birds, give them their traditional names. And the kids lay there and listen to the sound and they can hear the differences in different birds. So they're learning to look up, look at the stars. They're looking at everything that embodies them because they're a part of that order of our society. So that's probably what I do. I did it when I was teaching teachers. I said, let's get out of here. This is really 4 walls. How can we be creative? If you're going to work in communities, you're going to have to teach these kids to explore. Get them thinking about how they're going to teach their students, because not everything is written in books. They're not all constructs of our society as we know it today. So challenge ourselves, and I think I've been very fortunate with Balnarring Preschool, and even the little people come up to me who have been through the stages, say to me, Auntie, they don't teach us. I said, we'll have to teach the teachers how to learn. So it is about changing the order of children's development and experiencing their rights to be part of the assets of the land, because they're going to be the change makers. So we're investing in them in every which way. And then my lecturer, you got that card? When I did language and linguistics, said, why'd you write it in English? Not you. I said, that's all I had. And he said, it's not English. And when I was in Whipsy just recently, they showed me symbols. Why aren't you using like the hieroglyphs that people do as a word? So that's my next challenge with our young linguists, to be able to get them to make these cards. Because, see? So that's about, they will be changing language. And language, because this is Roman symbols, it's English, mine is anyway, and I saw the First Nations people doing it in a lot of the coding like you do, patterns and codes. So why can't we? There's no rule. There was a law, but we can challenge it, and that's what we do with children. They grow up, if you go out and listen to them, they break off into their own special little groups that they create, and just, they talk to you, their discoveries, they're sharing their ideas, they're exploring, and that's what we should be recording. And that's what we do with our books. Allow them to explore, allow them to illustrate. I write the stories. It's their books. They own it. They're little 3-year-olds. They've got great imaginations. And they're part of the story. And they become the teachers to their parents. It's like, if anybody ever knows Home Start, Head Start, it was for poor nations in Chicago, where parents didn't have basic rights to education, but their children were developing those skills, so they'd go home and teach their parents. So the reversal. So I was fascinated with that process. So the children go home and read the stories, and they know the language. So if that's an outcome, that's what it's about. Success, their success. And that's changing the ontology, changing methodology. It's a structure there, but it's a natural process. Children's development and growth. And about well-being and caring for each other. Thank you.
I might really quickly respond, if that's okay.
Yeah, but I just wanted to say about, because when Caroline was talking about Melbourne not being structured in the right way, I thought I should be doing a plug right there and then for the beautiful app, the mobile app Timer, which actually explores RMIT around this this space, but actually through Nawit's stories of the land. So we actually, and it's used as for students as orientation. So rather than walking around and seeing all the colonial buildings, they're actually, rather than seeing, they're feeling the stories of the land and where they're connecting to. And I think that multisensorial dimension, whenever I hear you, Nawit, Caroline, I find it very hard to talk afterwards because I just listen, like when you were saying about the kids just lying there and dreaming. You make me dream and think about those kind of the future architects, like, come on children, please, make the world good again. Sorry, Troy, I just wanted to intercept because I saw there was a moment to plug the Timer app, which is spelled TIM and then R.
Yeah.
In a very kind of cool way.
Thanks for mentioning that. In fact, if you notice, you've got a set of postcards on your chair. The one that has a picture of a tree, which is actually a Nagi tree, has a link to the current iteration of that project. So, you can go and play that. The RMIT City Campus, St Kilda, Footscray, or in the Melbourne CBD. That's actually a good segue to what I was going to say as well, because when we're talking about space and transforming space, whenever I listen to Nawi, a thousand ideas come up, and of course you're so generous with your knowledge, and these are all, it's not knowledge that, even though it comes from a long history and from a long kind of tradition and it has this place in the past, it is so contemporary as well, because even you're talking about that space or constructing space. That's what's happened in the children's sensorium, is this super architectural kind of almost like very kind of
anti-Sean Godzel. I don't know what he would think if he walked in there and saw what has happened to the children's like what the design hub. It's really it keeps it drawn up on the ceiling as well. So it's really kind of it's the new architects.
And yeah, literally, and it's a really gendered space, but it's been completely transformed to be this other environment that encourages all of these other ways of being in. And the project that we're just talking about is an augmented reality project, and augmented reality is one of these creative technologies that we've been working with, I guess, for a couple of decades really, but it's really coming to its own in the last decade, and it's about connecting information to place. And so, we all think we're really smart. We've found, through our mobiles, we can connect information to place. And of course, We's talking about, tens of thousands of years of knowledge and history and experience with connecting knowledge to place, which is done without a mobile phone, and also in a much more, I guess, deeper way. I think this idea of the deeper connection rather than just connecting, it's that kind of deeper connection, and that's what the children's sensorium is also trying to establish, as you said, Larissa, with children taking time to reflect and think about their ways of being in the world.
Just because I think we've got about 10 minutes left. Sorry, I didn't bring a watch with me. That's very...
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, well, just on that point of thinking about the multisensorial, because that's one of the things that the exhibition really pushes. So what does it mean to think about play and, and place when you're pushing the multisensorial? So Troy, I'd like you to maybe talk to that idea, and then Linda.
So I would probably start by connecting with Matthias' presentation this morning, because one of the things that you were talking about is this other space that emerges when people play, and you can't quite identify it, but it is embodied and it is sensorial, and it's sometimes without language, and it's maybe post-rational, or just in a different type of space. And I think when you were talking about some of the traditions for like listening to the landscape, listening to the world around you, that is not the way that we're used to being in the world. We're used to, particularly in an urban environment like this, all of the work that I've been doing for the past 10 plus years has been in public spaces and cities, and challenging this idea of like the Google map of getting from one point to the next, and you're not even aware of the space in between. You're kind of like just portaling between one it's maximising productivity. It's what
the puppet of the mobile.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the same thing the situations we're pushing against, right? In terms of the modern city of being all about functionality and supporting production and efficiency. I think that this is also the thing that post-pandemic is everyone's realised, well, was that really a good way to be in the world? And not everyone, but some people. And so, this kind of multi-sensory way of being in the world is less efficient, as you would say, Linda, but it is also more connected. And if you take a long view, not only more kind of meaningful way of being in the world, but if you want to put it into that kind of, I guess, rationalist view, it is actually more productive and efficient in terms of, I'm not trying to instrumentalise play, but there's so many arguments for shifting the way that we are in the world, and I think this is what Matthias is trying to do with counterplay as well, and that play has a role to do because you have to take people into that space. They have to literally experience it as a sensory thing. You can't just say, this is how it works, or make a TikTok about it or whatever. It's like a TED talk, I should say. I mean, same kind of thing. It's something you have to be within, and then once it's part of you, then it's part of you.
So, Linda, would you like to talk about mapping, maybe the multisensorial, and challenging maps as well? How we think about maps.
Certainly. I just do want to add something to the sensorial, though. One of the things that we talked about when we were running the sessions is observing how the children interacted with the space, and the space is within the space. So obviously it's a gallery, but then there are installations within the gallery space. And what was really lovely to see is that there were lots of hidey places, and the children sought those out. And that was really interesting to see, in that they were exploring the sensorium in really multiple ways. And children, particularly young children living through that pandemic, have been massively surveilled, and they are always on screen, right? So if they're doing learning or anything like that, they're always on screen, and it's a very flat dimension. And the sensorium really brought about lots of places for exploration that were they weren't easy to surveil the children, and so it was a really wonderful.
Can I just interrupt one moment, Linda, because I just wanted to do a shout out to Anthony Clark, who's an architect who works around autism and special needs, and so that was very much his intervention in the space about having places in which kids can hide, because not everyone wants to be out in spaces. And sometimes because there is so many different senses, the smell, touch, see, etc., that sometimes they do just need to find little hidey spots. And so that was actually that was designed intentionally.
And it was just really lovely to see the children totally grasp that. And so, but in terms of mapping, so the space is full. The space is a really full, interesting space of lots of different surfaces, lots of different nooks and crannies, lots of different kind of sensations in terms of the materials within the space as well. The lights, the shadows caused by the lights, the sounds, the kind of recordings that were being projected within the space. And so for me, mapping is about how we collectively as humans think about the place that we're in, and how we kind of try and connect to that place. And when I say mapping, my work is very interested in contesting those kind of Western colonial notions of mapping for extractivism or ownership or just invasion, but also the very diverse ways of mapping that are used by people across the world and across history, and how they are a way of making connection with a place in relation to the place, not in relation to the human necessarily. So how we think about that with young children is the work that I am really interested in doing. And so just going to what Troy mentioned in terms of inefficiency, it's about recognising that we cannot be at the centre of everything, and so the mapping is a way for us to understand that if we look in one direction, the whole world is continuing to take place in all the other directions, and we miss that. And so anything we kind of pay attention to is only ever partial, and therefore it is an inefficient process. But that's actually a good thing, because it reminds us that we are only part of the story, and we are only ever part of the story, and we can pay attention to things in that partial way, but we understand we're a very small part of the whole picture. And so the children started to connect with the space, I think. The mapping helped them to kind of hone in on certain things and to really notice certain details without feeling overwhelmed, and that they could kind of pay attention to a small part and be quite calm and measured, and then move to another part, and so on and so forth. And so this process was less frantic, if you like, and allowed them to spend time connecting to a small detail. And I do a lot of work with children with additional needs. I do a lot of work with the National Gallery of Victoria, helping children to think about art and how they might connect to art. We use the mapping as a process to help children focus on certain aspects and to think about that partiality as being a practice of noticing, attuning and connecting. And I found that very much within the Sensorium. Sorry, I was just getting my clock. So we've got like 5 minutes left, and I was wondering, maybe there's a moment now for audience to open up for audience questions or comments or anything that's being said here that has made you think, children as the future architects or or designers as that. Yeah, so I'm going to open it up to the audience. This is your active moment. This is when I'm going to turn. You've been very good, deep listeners. Now's the point to kind of... was there anything about the multisensorial dimensions, or...
I could choose someone, but I also want to...
I know you could dog, otherwise Troy's going to dog people in.
Point out this slide, which is the language cards that were part of the workshop that you were running.
Yes.
In action. When kids were drawing and making their own responses to Indigenous language and to their experience with the children's sensorium. So, because we didn't contextualise that, but Larissa organised a number of workshops, and so this is a really fantastic space to work within as well. And this may be a kind of way that I would even put Matthias on the spot. Maybe you want to respond to this idea in some way.
Okay, Keynote, you've been put on the spot. You thought you were relaxing now for the day.
I thought I was done for today. I think it's beautiful. Like, I find it really overwhelming in a way. Maybe like there's some depth to this also with the 80,000 years of history and all of that I'm very sort of extremely inspired by, and it reaches so much deeper than anything I feel like I have ever been involved with, which so my contributions are sort of quite on the surface compared to this, but I feel like there is a kinship in the efforts in the spaces that we're trying to create, like insisting that if we are to be in this world together in a more meaningful way, like with other people, but especially also with non-humans and the land and all of that, then we need to accept that these dogmas of rationalism and efficiency and return on investment and all of these kinds of words are not enough. They're probably also counterproductive to the aims that we have. And I really feel like you are showing the way here. I have made some humble attempts back in Denmark. The one thing that I always really hope for is that we can create stronger connections. You all talk about this, like, because there are sort of islands of people around the world who understand this, who really would salute this and love this the same way that I do, but we sometimes feel too alone, because none of us can really do this, cause these changes alone. So that's maybe the one thing that I think, how do we create stronger connections between a wonderful project like this and whatever small thing I'm doing, what other people are doing, right? Because I think the ground is fertile in a way, like this could bloom to a much greater extent. And now I just want to go and see it.
So it's just down in the design hub.
It's not open today.
In fact,
but it's open the rest of the week.
Yeah, galleries are always closed. On Mondays is the gallery and museum closing day, I think internationally. I think it's a bit of a thing, so...
Long weekend.
But yeah, maybe that's how we can finish, is during Games Week, please visit the Children's Sensorium in the Design Hub Gallery. And we have one more question.
It's more of a comment that I found fascinating was the hiding spots that you spoke about, and the recognizing that some kids don't like to be out in the open and because of being seen entirely there, throughout the day. But providing for the spaces, that ties back into Matthias's talk about how some adults need a push for a couple of days to get into play, but sometimes maybe to be included they need hiding spots with play included. So I found it fascinating that for kids it was recognized, but maybe we need to recognize that for adults as well.
Completely, because not everyone's an extrovert.
Yeah.
Oh, I agree, because I'm an extrovert introvert.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that can take place is that kind of imaginative game making, and that's actually what we observed some children in an enclosed space, and they kind of just produced this little game-making process the instant they were in this space. It kind of shifted how they were, and that was super interesting.
And that's, should be recorded, because they're telling you a story, what they've created, and we should be valuing those. I did have to go to a school that they deemed as a disadvantaged kids with learning difficulties. And it's about the maps. And I thought, well, these kids are travelling here every day. Nobody's ever asked them what they see on the way. So I asked them, what did you see on the way? And they gave me I got a whole direction of where they were travelling and what they saw on that day. And these kids, these young people, have never been asked their journey to place. And and they thought, God, we've never thought of that. The kids tell a story. They wouldn't have articulated, they knew how to put it down, but it was getting a map and doing their own direction, so it can be challenged in many different ways. Young people their classes disadvantaged or lack, they call them marginalised groups, or kids with a deficit learning. Well, those young people had a learning that they shared with all of us. So don't underestimate what kids witness and see as they're progressing from one place to the other. They're going on that journey by themselves. They've learnt to get there. They witness, because no one's talking to them. There's a lot of noise going on, but they're witnessing, and that's their story for the day and what they'll remember when they go home. So it's good for people to learn to be observant, to be what's around you, and I think that's one of the things we're able to see and challenge the teachers, that these are assets for your learning about what your young people are witnessing on the way here. So it was just a challenge, and it was like what we were doing when we were doing that mapping about Melbourne and remembering the disruption, you know, and trying to recreate what Melbourne was one of the biggest wetlands in Australia. And I don't think people understand that. So when I work with the architect students, I tell them to bring it up out of the swamp or wetlands. They don't like swamp. So I said, make this, I want them to build a treaty assembly. So I've given them a challenge that will meet all the needs of our First Peoples with our treaty assembly, and these young people are really moving forward. I've been working with architects, designing a whole school. That's what you've got to help me with, a whole school. And now it's been written up in Hansard, that the whole story, that these children will be immersing every part of that part of learning for the preppies right through till grade 6. When they leave, they will have a sense of connection to people and place. Everything will be a story as they journey through that school. And what they'll find, it's been turned upside down. So what's in the heavens is reflected on earth. So what's in the heavens are like the stars. These are the things that the children will explore. So it's being built as we speak in North Melbourne. And I noticed it in Hansard the other day. So they've given the approval that it's to be built, and it'll be a real exploratory process. Now, other states want the same understanding, so that architects are working with communities, Indigenous communities, to start designing. We need curriculum developed and all that to complete the picture, so those children will learn about, not study us, be part of us. So that's a journey.
Listening and those other multi-sensory form ways of being are things that arise through play.
So Troy, we're going to finish up the session, but I'm going to take up the challenge that was raised about the kinship and how we might keep this going and to do this kind of deeper play discussion. And I'm going to dob you in, the Future Play Lab director, as that's your...
I already put Matthias on the spot to run counterplay here in this space next year.
Yes.
So
we've got people witnessing, so it's all... so thank you very much to what a wonderful, wonderful panel, wonderful discussion. Thank you to Nawi, Caroline, Briggs, PhD, Professor AM.
Until I was 73 to get all that. 70, because I better settle down now.
She's collecting lots of them behind.
I'll go with these things.
Associate Professor Linda Knight and Senior Lecturer Troy Innocent, Director of the Future Play Lab. Thank you. And to the audience, thank you very much.
and thank you, Larissa.